David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
What a news weekend. Just truly a stunning story after story. And I want to start with this bombshell report, which claims that Donald Trump directed his attorney, Michael Cohen, to lie to Congress about the reality of the Trump Tower Moscow project. And if true, we're now talking about felony obstruction of justice and possible witness tampering. This is one of the things that brought down Richard Nixon in the 1970s. Really important not to miss that. But what if it's not true? Because 24 hours after the initial report, Robert Mueller's spokesperson put out a very carefully worded statement about the story, which has the right immediately screaming fake news. But the original reporters for Buzzfeed News are standing by the story. And there is every indication here that the spirit of the story is 100% true. So today, I'm going to give you both sides of the full story, and we'll see where we come out. The starting point for this story is that Buzzfeed News broke this on Friday, claiming that Donald Trump had personally directed Michael Cohen to lie to Congress about the Trump Tower Moscow project. And the point of that lying was to hide how involved Donald Trump really was with the project, to try to corroborate the statements we've heard from him in the past. Buzzfeed News put this report out. They cited 2 federal law enforcement officials. So this is huge because it would be evidence, as I mentioned, of Donald Trump obstructing justice for sure in the legal sense. Trump has been claiming that he had little to do with the Trump Tower Moscow project, that barely anything was being done to push that project forward. The truth appears to be that Donald Trump was actually really involved and really wanting to push that forward, even telling Michael Cohen to go and set a meeting with Vladimir Putin. So this would be a corroboration of something that Buzzfeed News previously reported on the basis of text messages and emails. So let's start with that. First of all, people who reacted by saying, oh, Buzzfeed News, it's fake news. Buzzfeed News is not BuzzFeed, okay? This is not a fake news site. It's a news website which can get things wrong, but they source their work. Second, there's the idea that Buzzfeed News would just make up having 2 federal sources that they don't really have, and that would be extraordinarily stupid. It would eventually come out that Buzzfeed News did that. It would be very damaging to them. The short-term benefit of being able to break this story would be far outweighed by the damage that just making up federal sources they don't really have would be. It would be inconceivable that they would do that. And this story comes out. It appears to be very destructive to the Trump presidency. Talk of Richard Nixon flows freely. Everybody's abuzz, except then we get a statement from Robert Mueller's spokesperson about the story, which says, Buzzfeed's description of specific statements to the special counsel's office and characterization of documents and testimony obtained by this office regarding Michael Cohen's congressional testimony are not accurate. And immediately, as quickly as the story came up as a huge, damaging piece of news for Donald Trump, the right says, see, the entire story was fake news and it can all be ignored, except not quite so fast. OK, look at the specific wording here. The descriptions of specific statements to the special counsel's office. Not that Cohen didn't testify to this at all, but the descriptions of specific statements made to that office and the characterization of documents doesn't mean that the underlying spirit of this is anything other than, yeah, Trump instructed Cohen to lie. This is a document that, interpreted narrowly as a legal document, doesn't refute the spirit of the story. What Mueller said is that something in the report was not totally and literally accurate. It could still be completely true that Donald Trump directed Michael Cohen to lie. And that's really the only part that actually matters here. And then we have the fact that Buzzfeed News is standing by the full scope of the story, period. So let's just be objective here. We don't have to be falsely neutral. Let's just be objective. We can't accept every detail of the story as 100% true, especially in light of Mueller's statement. We can't count on this being the we got him moment, but I would be stunned if there was no factual basis to the claim that Michael Cohen was directed in his testimony to some degree by Donald Trump. And the most compelling evidence for me is that both Rudy Giuliani and a White House spokesperson are not denying it. And that's exactly where we are going to go next. So I've already laid out for you the Buzzfeed news story about Donald Trump directing Michael Cohen to lie to Congress, which would be felony obstruction of justice if true. I already told you that Robert Mueller put out this very narrowly, carefully worded statement about it. And I told you that Buzzfeed News is standing by the story. Okay. Now we have to get into some seriously damaging realities about this for Donald Trump, which are that both the White House and his attorney, Rudy Giuliani, one of Trump's many lawyers, are not denying that this happened as described. Fox News interviewed White House spokesperson Hogan Gidley about this report, and Gidley could have denied it multiple times, and he did not. Now, remember, Robert Mueller's statement said that some specific statements and characterizations of documents are not accurate. That is very, very different than Donald Trump didn't do it at all, okay? Here's Hogan Gidley with every opportunity to simply say it didn't happen. Tell me what you make of this.
How's the president responding to that report this morning?
This is absolutely ludicrous that we are giving any type of credence or credibility to a news outlet like Buzzfeed. They are responsible completely and totally for the release of a discredited, disproven, false dossier. And now the author of the piece in question that you're talking about went on air this morning and said he couldn't corroborate any of his own evidence. He ran it anyway. This is, quite frankly, the problem with the press and why the president continues to call them fake news repeatedly.
So, ad hominem, Buzzfeed is bad. He claims that the Steele dossier is false. That's not true. More and more of it has actually been corroborated since its release. And then he says that Buzzfeed, that President Trump is right to call Buzzfeed and others fake news, which is, of course, not an argument. This interview continues. And again, opportunities for Hogan Gidley to say the story's not true, but he doesn't do it.
I think the way it was characterized, the reporter did not see specifically the evidence, but relied on one or two sources that they had trusted for this.
Right, but that's not news. That's something he sees and he puts out there. It's the same reason and rationale behind a dossier that has caused this entire fake witch hunt Russia investigation, and now it's all been disproven.
So once again, he says the dossier was the sole basis for the Trump-Russia investigation. That's not true. He says that it's a witch hunt. Well, we've had more than a dozen indictments already, and he says that it's all been disproven, which is simply not true. But missing there, once again, is any kind of denial. It continues.
You're saying the president did not tell Michael Cohen to do that?
I'm telling you right now, this is exactly why the president refuses to give any credence or credibility to news outlets, because they have no ability to corroborate anything they're putting out there. Instead, they're just using innuendo and shady sources.
That was not a denial of my question.
No, but the premise is ridiculous. We're also talking about a person in Michael Cohen who, quite frankly, has now been proven to be a liar. He self-admits that he's a felon.
That is not a denial, Bill Hemmer points out. And Hogan Gidley says, yeah, that's true. And then they just ad hominem Michael Cohen, which, again, is not only not a denial, it's not even really an argument. Every opportunity here, Pat, to issue even a muted denial or a partial denial, but he doesn't do it. And it could simply be Hogan Gidley, now I'm forgetting his name. He just doesn't want to go to prison, and he knows that it probably is true that this took place.
Yeah, but it's not like it's a crime to lie to the media. It's not like he's going out there in front of Congress or he's under oath in some sense. So it wouldn't be something criminal for him to do that. But maybe he wants to save face and maybe protect his reputation, future job prospects, that sort of thing.
I don't disagree whatsoever. It simply tells us more than anything else that there probably is a lot to this story. And then after Hogan Bidley, now I'm not even sure what his name is, in comes Rudy Giuliani, that name I'm sure of, And he straight up plays the yeah and so what game, trying to distract from the content of this conversation that might have taken place between Donald Trump and Michael Cohen, ignoring the question of whether Trump told Cohen to lie, simply saying, yeah, so what if Michael Cohen did have a conversation with Trump about his testimony?
As far as I know, President Trump did not have discussions with him, certainly had no discussions with him in which he told him or counseled him to lie. If he had any discussions with him, they'd be about the version of the events that Michael Cohen gave then, which they all believe was true. I believed it was true. I still believe it may be true because unlike these people who want to just believe him, I believe Michael Cohen is a serial liar. If you can figure out when Michael Cohen's telling the truth, you're better than I am, Jake.
Just acknowledge that President Trump might have talked to him about his testimony.
And so what if he talked to him about it?
Is it not possible that Michael Cohen had that conversation? And I'm just asking you for what happened or what didn't happen.
It's not possible.
That Michael Cohen left the conversation thinking, well, this is what the boss wants me to say. The boss wants me to say.
Not possible. The guy driving this testimony was Michael Cohen.
So consider what Giuliani is saying. Yes, it actually may be true that Donald Trump had a conversation with Michael Cohen about the testimony, but he definitely didn't tell him to lie, although Giuliani doesn't know what happened in the conversation. How can a person be so sure about the content of a conversation that he has no idea whether even it took place or not? It's by definition absurd. Giuliani has no way of knowing that Cohen was not directed to lie if he doesn't know what was or wasn't said during that conversation. And likewise, this so what game that they're playing, this is increasingly the only game Giuliani has left. There definitely wasn't any collusion. Oh, well, listen, collusion is not actually a crime. I don't know of any crime that's actually called collusion. This is the so what game that they're increasingly playing. And I would also add that the timing of all of this is extraordinarily suspicious because as this entire Cohen thing was ramping up, Trump was on increasingly bad terms with Michael Cohen. So the idea that they had this sort of friendly, inconsequential conversation about the testimony without discussing what it is that Donald Trump would prefer Michael Cohen to say is probably the least believable version of this story altogether. So when you step back for a second and get above the back and forth about adjudicating the Buzzfeed News statements word for word and Mueller's statements about mischaracterizations word for word, what you get to is that Donald Trump's own lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, is admitting, yes, actually, Trump may have spoken to Cohen about the testimony, but he definitely didn't tell him what to say. And if he did, he was only telling him what to say because he believed that to be the most accurate version of the events. This is simply not believable, particularly when Rudy Giuliani on all of these issues has been going in the direction of the if it happened, so what point of view. So my best guess right now about what happened is that BuzzFeed's report is correct, that there was some kind of admittedly maybe vague evidence that Donald Trump did direct Michael Cohen to lie, but it's not as specific as the characterization that BuzzFeed News gave. Cohen claims that he was directed to lie by Donald Trump. Maybe there's a text message or an email or a recording that sort of circumstantially defends it, but it certainly wouldn't be what the special counsel calls incontrovertible evidence that would be likely to get anybody a conviction. And it's also quite possible that the inaccuracy in the BuzzFeed News story is merely that the testimony wasn't given to the special counsel, but rather to the Southern District of New York, which has been doing a lot of the work here. Because if we put the quote back up for a second, you'll notice that what the statement says is BuzzFeed's description of specific statements to the special counsel's office. It may be that the statements are exactly as described, but they were made to the Southern District of New York prosecutors and investigators rather than to the special counsel's office. So that clarification statement from Mueller's spokesperson could merely be a disagreement on the venue, and it would still fully allow the spirit of the BuzzFeed News story to be true, simply not as statements made to the special counsel's office. Will we ever know the full truth? I certainly hope so. Send me your thoughts about the story. Send me your thoughts about where you are on it at this point. The show is on Twitter at David Pakman Show. I'm on Twitter at DPakman. Follow us both and send me your comments.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Today's new member of the day is Lori Romano. Lori, thank you for supporting the show. Really appreciate you and you being new member of the day in a month that may set the David Pakman Show record for new members in a month. We're approaching 400 new members this month. Absolutely massive month. And I also want to say thanks to Alexander Kuda, who is today's longtime sustaining Hall of Fame member of the day with us nearly 5 years. And I have a big announcement to make. We are now just a couple of weeks from my birthday. People have started to write in, David, I want to send you a birthday gift. Where do I send it? And I have been saying, please do not send me any gifts. The goal this year is to grow the David Pakman Show as much as possible in advance of the 2020 election. So if you want to get me a gift of any kind, and by no means should you feel obligated to do that, consider getting on our newsletter at davidpakman.com, because on my birthday, on February 2nd, we will be doing a mass email with just an insane membership special. And if you want to be notified about that huge special, just get on our mailing list at davidpakman.com. And on February 2nd, you will be given the opportunity of a lifetime, or at least of the year, to sign up for membership at a greatly discounted rate. Okay, Donald Trump last week announced that he would be giving another border wall speech on Saturday at 3 p.m. Eastern time. It ultimately got pushed back an hour, and it ended up happening just after 4 p.m. Eastern time from the Oval Office on Saturday. And it was being previewed as this big compromise that Donald Trump was going to offer. Trump was ready to deal and give this fantastic set of parameters to Democrats to get government reopened, of course, including funding for his border wall. Remember, the government shutdown that is still going on is over the border wall. Donald Trump effectively throwing a temper tantrum. He already gave one speech where he claimed that we have an immigration crisis, the solution to which lies solely in a $5.7 billion partial border wall. I'm not going to play the speech for you. You can find it online easily. And what I want to do instead is just get into the analysis of what was said. But quite frankly, another reason not to play the speech is that it was a repetition mostly of the things that Donald Trump said in the first one, all of which the ones that required debunking, we already debunked. And missing from the entire thing, just like last time, was a discussion of the fact that Trump promised that Mexico was going to pay for the wall. That's totally, utterly, obviously off the table now, and it's not even being mentioned in these discussions of the wall, even though Trump told us endless times Mexico is going to pay for that wall. Donald Trump did repeat during border wall speech number 2 that, quote, drugs are coming over the border and the wall is going to fix it. Obviously, that's a lie. Most of the drugs coming from Mexico aren't crossing anywhere where we would have a border wall. They're crossing through ports of entry. And of course, most drugs in the United States aren't coming over the border at all. Donald Trump repeated once again the lie that undocumented immigration holds wages down. I've talked about this before. The corporations who are hiring undocumented immigrants are to blame for any impact on wages, which by all accounts is extraordinarily modest. But the real problem is that the corporations aren't being punished for hiring undocumented immigrants, and the undocumented immigrants are being scapegoated there. I've already widely talked about that. I won't spend a lot of time on it today. But Donald Trump's proposal and offer to Democrats is what I want to focus in on. Donald Trump wants, to begin with, number one, $800 million in humanitarian aid. Number two, $805 million in drug detection, 2,750 additional border agents and law enforcement new hires, 75 judge teams for immigration courts, and of course, $5.7 billion for what he is now calling a steel barrier along 230 miles of border. Amazingly, during this speech, Donald Trump actually said, you know, we don't really need a border wall across the entire border, because there are some natural barriers like bodies of water, which of course is exactly what we've been saying for years at this point. Trump isn't actually realizing that he doesn't want that full border wall. He's realizing that he's just not going to get a win on the entire border wall. So now he's pretending he never really wanted the whole border wall anyway. Absolutely unbelievable that the goalposts are being moved in this way. Now, what is Donald Trump willing to offer Democrats if they give him the $5.7 billion in order to get government reopened? Trump is willing to give, number one, an asylum application process that would take place in countries of origin. Okay, this is a big deal because there's this discussion over people are coming in these caravans to the border and they're coming over illegally, except no, they're not. They're actually going to the border to request asylum because there's no process for doing that in their country of origin. Donald Trump is offering to create an application process for asylum where people can do it in their country of origin. And Donald Trump is offering 3 years of relief for DACA recipients, during which they would know that they don't risk deportation, and a 3-year extension on what's called TPS, temporary protected status, for some undocumented immigrants. This is a ruse through and through, okay? Number one, Donald Trump framed this entire offer as it being a good thing, even from his perspective, that 3 years of relief and 3 years of extension for TPS and for DACA recipients, respectively, would be part of the deal. If those are obviously good and moral things, why did Trump take them away in the first place? And number two, why is Trump now offering them as what the other side gets? In other words, if Donald Trump agrees that everybody should be pleased about the extension for DACA recipients and the extension to temporary protected status, why is it that those are the things he's willing to give up? If they're good, why isn't he saying that he wants them, as opposed to having taken them away and now offering to give them back only if we give him money for the border wall? That doesn't make any sense. But the real big issue here for me, Pat, is that there's no path to citizenship here for the DACA recipients. That's the real issue, because Republicans know that they are not going to be able to weather the political consequences of starting to deport kids who were brought here by their parents who were undocumented immigrants. That's not going to fly for Republicans, and they know it. So the idea here of playing coy as if this is some big concession, even though it doesn't actually include a path to citizenship, it is a complete and total ruse, and I support Democrats rejecting this offer.
But the fact that Trump is even making an offer that will make him look good in the eyes of many, I do think that we're getting closer here to a compromise, and it may be something like $3 billion for the wall in exchange for permanent protection for DACA recipients. That may be something that I can get behind. I wonder if Trump is willing to back off that $5.7 billion number for the wall. I don't know where he came up with that, but he seems to be pretty glued to it.
Yeah, I'm quite frankly not married to no money for the wall if what's offered is actually really good, because remember, the border wall is going to take much longer than Donald Trump is going to be in office to actually build. And even though $5.7 billion or $3 billion, as Pat is suggesting, these are insane amounts of money, right? The amount of stuff that you could do with that amount of money is truly stunning. So I'm not pretending like because it's the government, billions don't matter. But if $3 billion were to be authorized in exchange for permanent status for DACA recipients, that permanent status would be a really, really big deal. And even the authorization of the $3 billion, which would in the end probably go, using Trump's math, for about 150 miles of border fence or steel barrier or whatever, much of which would clearly not end up being built because of the slowness with which it would actually take place, I would be open to that. I am not ideologically opposed to a single dollar for the wall if what's being offered actually makes sense. And of course, what Trump in his first offer made available doesn't make any sense, and it's a total ruse. And he's also making totally misleading claims about what the impact of it would be. Donald Trump is claiming that the border wall would cut drugs and undocumented crossings by 50%. I mean, that's impossible mathematically. Remember that only a third of all undocumented entries are even happening via the border. Most of the drugs are coming through ports of entry, not through spots in the border where a border wall would be placed. So The claims as to how it would work are completely wrong. The offer is a completely bogus ruse. Democrats should reject it, and they should insist for the time being on no money for the wall. We will negotiate on that once government is open. Trump is increasingly in an untenable position, and that's actually a good thing for Democrats. Nancy Pelosi's approval numbers keep climbing and climbing. Donald Trump's keep dropping and dropping from the low 40s, now back into the high 30s, and they've been there for a couple of weeks. This is not such an amazing deal from for Democrats that they are in a perilous position by rejecting it. In fact, Nancy Pelosi's approval rating has been doing really well, given how she's been standing up to President Trump. The wall is something that low information people can very easily get behind. They can pretend that it would be effective. They can pretend that it's the big alpha male accomplishment for Donald Trump. But let's not allow him to do it unless the offer is serious. And if DACA is what's on the table, there has to be some kind of permanent status. I don't want the wall. I don't think it's effective. I don't think we would be wasting money on it. But I actually would be open to some funding for the wall if Democrats can get something serious on DACA permanent status. And then lastly, by the way, to go back to what Trump wants, which is $1.6 billion for humanitarian aid and drug technology, stopping drugs from coming over, nearly 3,000 new law enforcement and border officials, and 75 new judge teams. For the party of small government, that's a pretty massive expansion of government. And I'm not saying we don't need more judge teams. We actually do. One of the reasons that people are staying for such long periods of time in these detention situations on the border is that the immigration courts are functioning really slowly because they are not nearly as well staffed as they should be. So I'm in favor of that. But the idea that what Trump wants is such a massive expansion of government seems to have gone completely unnoticed or deliberately ignored by the so-called small government conservatives. My question to you, do you think that Democrats should accept this offer, which supposedly Mitch McConnell is going to bring up for a vote in the Senate this week, or do you agree with me that as it stands right now, it should be rejected? Send me your thoughts. The show is on Instagram at David Pakman Show. I'm on Instagram at david.pakman. Follow us there. Poll upcoming about what you think Democrats should do.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
There's an investment scam I want to talk to you about today, which has actually been around for a while, but it's really grown lately because of its association with Donald Trump. And this is a general type of investment scam called a foreign currency scam. But the one I'm going to talk about today in particular centers around a practically worthless currency, the Iraqi currency, the Iraqi dinar. The premise is this. Right now, the Iraqi currency is really undervalued. So say the evangelists, or some people call them scammers. So as a result, it's a really great investment opportunity. If you buy some of these Iraqi dinars now with US dollars, all you need to do is wait until Iraq revalues the currency, at which point you'll make a huge profit by exchanging the dinars back for US dollars. So to set up the math of it, right now, one US dollar is right around 1,200 Iraqi dinars. Or to say it a different way, one dinar is worth about $0.00084, okay, or 0.084 cents per dollar. The people that are promoting this scam claim that once the currency revalues, or RVs as they call it, one dinar could be worth as much as 3 or 4 US dollars, or almost 5,000 times more valuable than it is right now. This seems like most currency investment opportunities. You buy now, that currency becomes more valuable, you cash out, and it's a big win. But the key here is that there's something about the Iraqi dinar that will in particular make it very quickly increase in value, so that in a way that is connected with political decisions or political circumstances. And we'll get to exactly what those are in a second. Before the Trump era, the Dinarians have been saying that this revaluation is just about to happen. It's going to happen any day. They've been saying this for years, at least since 2012. And if you check out the Dinar Guru, which is an online forum about the dinar, 26% believe that this revaluation is just days away. 74% believe that, quote, the dinar will not change until certain things are accomplished. And that will get us to why this is growing so much right now. If you Google Iraqi dinar, the top results are all forums that focus on this currency scam, like Dinar Guru. The websites are filled with all these little tidbits of information about the political situation, the economic situation in Iraq. A lot of them are updated multiple times per day. The facts are very much cherry-picked to make the readers feel like this is on the verge of happening. This revaluation is almost there. It's going to happen any moment now. And it's all meant to get people to invest right away without much research into this out of fear of missing out on this great revaluation. And it also encourages people who own dinars to keep holding them. This has been a known scam for a while. If you go back to 2013, the Better Business Bureau specifically names the Iraqi dinar as a currency that's often sold in these foreign currency scams, along with the Vietnamese dong and the Egyptian pound. In October of 2018, the Justice Department in Atlanta successfully prosecuted the co-owners and the chief operating officer of one of the largest Iraqi dinar exchanges in the United States, convicting them of fraud. The business they ran was worth over $600 million. In 2015, federal attorneys for the Northern District of Ohio tried and sentenced a man to prison for running a fraud scheme worth over $24 million, which included selling Iraqi dinars. Technically, it's illegal to sell an investment opportunity to the public without a license, but many of the dinar sellers are operating because of a legal technicality, we could call it. It's technically legal to sell currencies if and only if they're considered to be collector or novelty items. The other way that businesses are able to legally operate is by registering as money service businesses, MSBs, with the U.S. Treasury Department. This is just one form you have to fill out. Very little oversight is actually happening. The reason, which we are now getting to, that this scam has exploded recently is Donald Trump, because Trump was rumored to be an investor in the Iraqi dinar himself. So when Trump was elected in 2016, the scam was revitalized with the idea that Donald Trump's policy in order to enrich himself, which actually is not far-fetched that he would do policy to enrich himself, would include the revaluation of the dinar. There's a 2017 press conference where Trump actually said that soon all currencies will be, quote, on a level playing field. A very vague statement. But when Trump said this, he was probably talking about Chinese currency and the trade imbalance with China. But the Dinarians interpreted or claimed to believe, for the purposes of pumping their scam, that Trump was talking about maybe revaluing the dinar. Trumpists and Dinarians are two different groups, but there's overlap between the two. Will Sommer has a great article in the Daily Beast called Trump Fans Sink Savings into Iraqi Dinar Scam, which shows that many investors in the scheme are also big Trump fans. Many of them tweet about QAnon 1 minute and then about dinar revaluation the next. To understand why people could be led to believe that this worthless currency is actually on the cusp of an extreme revaluation, we've got to take a quick look at the past few decades of Iraqi history. The current exchange rate, as I mentioned, between the dollar and the dinar is about 1 to 1,200. This means that if you went to Iraq tomorrow and exchanged $100 for dinars, you would get about 120,000 dinar back. But the exchange rate wasn't always like this. If you go back to 1988, the exchange rate was 1 dinar to $3.22, meaning that $100 in Iraq in 1988 would be worth 31 dinars in return. Things changed when Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait. And by late 1995, after that invasion and the first Iraq war, the value of the dinar was down to $1 being worth roughly 3,000 dinar. Things have gotten worse since the U.S. invaded Iraq under false pretenses in 2003. And since then, Iraq has been continuously embroiled in insurgency and civil strife, which anyone who's been following politics is aware of. Civil war, instability, these are not good things for a nation's economy. And although things have started to improve somewhat recently in Iraq, it's still precarious. Iraq is still engaged in the war against ISIS. Its government is in a very tenuous political position at best. And oftentimes people who are invested in this scam like to bring up the example of the Kuwaiti dinar, which after the Gulf War did actually experience a pretty significant revaluation. The country is also Iraq's neighbor, so it might seem sort of superficially reasonable, but this is a misleading comparison. Number one, Kuwait's a much wealthier country than Iraq. Massive oil reserves, much bigger than Iraq's. It also has far fewer people to take care of, 3 million in Kuwait versus 33 million in Iraq. Although Kuwait suffered damage to its people and its infrastructure when Saddam invaded, that pales in comparison to 15 years of constant war and constant instability in Iraq, much of it brought by the United States with its invasion in 2003. And even today, Iraq still needs to contend with the threat of civil war, which Kuwait did not have to deal with. The other important reality ignored by the Dinarians is that such a revaluation that they are saying could happen any day would immediately be harmful to the Iraqi economy, and it would only undermine the Iraqi government's ability to pay its own debts, because an increase in the value of its currency would make their extensive government debt even more expensive to repay. And with the country still requiring loans from the IMF and other international financial bodies just to maintain current spending levels, there's no incentive for the government to push for that revaluation. One reason that the dinar scam feels real to many people is that when you invest in it, you think you're getting something of real tangible value, a valuable asset. On YouTube right now, there are an untold number of videos of people excitedly unboxing their shipments full of dinar. But the problem is that the dinar is not even worth the paper it's printed on outside of Iraq. The only reason that having dinar would be useful to any American consumer would be if they were traveling to Iraq, not something that many Americans are doing. Outside of Iraq's borders, there are no currency exchange houses or banks that are willing to exchange dinar for dollars. Since no exchange exists, dinar dealers are able to charge whatever price they want when you want to buy these dinars or when you want to sell them. The spread between the buy and sell price is often up to 20%, which is outrageous compared to any other stable or even remotely stable currency. So even if you say, you know what, I'm going to cut my losses and sell the dinar back immediately, I made a mistake, you can lose up to 20% of your investment instantly, even without any change in the currency's valuation. These dinarians are modern day snake oil salesmen, but instead of curing physical ailments, this investment of only a few $1,000s is sold as potentially curing all of your financial woes and leaving you very rich. Of course, it's not going to happen, and the Trump presidency is only making the scam even more prevalent.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
I really struggled with how to cover this story of a group of MAGA hat-wearing, Trump-supporting high school students from Covington, Kentucky, who surrounded and mocked a Native American military veteran at a Washington, D.C. rally. Because at first I saw posts on Twitter and Facebook about how the only perpetrators here were the entitled, smirking, privileged, mostly white, anti-abortion Catholic school kids, and how it was wrong that they surrounded this Native American protester in this intimidating way. I also started seeing posts with a very different perspective, which was the kids did nothing wrong. The problem was that there was instigation, not only by Nathan Phillips, the Native American military veteran who was singing and playing a drum, but also by so-called black Muslims who were not actually black Muslims, and we'll get to that a little bit later. and that actually these kids should be applauded for not becoming violent when they were approached by a very hostile crowd. The truth is neither of those extremes, and we are now fortunately getting some more nuance on the story, and I know that probably everyone will be upset with me for my understanding of the story, but as I've always done on the program, I'm not going to give you anything other than my honest and genuine perspective. So let's get into it. This all happened after an Indigenous Peoples March and an anti-abortion march, both in Washington, D.C., sort of collided, okay? And I could focus on the coarsening of the culture under Trump. I could talk about education as the catalyst here, or violence. We could make it about racism and xenophobia. We could make it about Catholic schools and parenting and social class and entitlement. And it would be a story about all of those things. But this one actually mostly is a story about toxic partisan politics combined with elements of all of that other stuff. This is the last show that would be caught doing the both sides are to blame thing when that's not actually the case, okay? When it comes to, take your pick, fake news, it's not both sides. The right is overwhelmingly the perpetrator and perpetuator of fake news. When it comes to voter suppression, it's not both sides. It's the right that has figured out that they benefit from fewer people voting, and it's mostly, almost exclusively the right that's trying to hold down the vote. But I went back and I took a look at this nearly 2-hour video of the incident in Washington, D.C., and there is no shortage of blame to go around here for what went on. And what's really important here is that one person or group's wrongs don't justify anyone else's wrongs here. This is not a defense of these MAGA hat-wearing kids, and we'll get to that. But the point is, the story that the only thing to comment on here is these MAGA hat-wearing kids who were standing around a Native American protester is simply wrong. And even the New York Times, which is no bastion of right-wing conspiracy theories, is saying that the full video, part of which we're playing now for people, tells a very different story than just that initial piece of the video that went viral. The initial piece that went viral was Native American military veteran Nathan Phillips beating a drum and singing, surrounded by a group of young, mostly white teenagers that looked like they came not from an anti-abortion rally, but from a Trump rally where they spent all of their allowance money on Trump apparel and hats, right? And in fact, in the video, you see at one point that one of the kids is standing about 12 inches from Nathan Phillips's face with this ludicrous smirk. That was at first the only part of the video that got attention, and it should have gotten attention because these kids are standing around one guy in a way that looks intimidating. Their entitled smirks should piss anyone off. It certainly pissed me off. Their school is investigating what took place. The school says they'll take appropriate action. These are kids who also are pictured in other stories that have come out about them at a basketball game, for example, against a mostly black team, screaming at the black players. Some of them had painted their entire bodies. Basically, instead of blackface, it was like a black body. There's every indication that these kids are extraordinarily annoying, entitled, ignorant clowns enabled by their parents, teachers, chaperones, whoever else is around them. That is a story here. But to pretend that they simply showed up looking for trouble while no one else was misbehaving and there were no other factors here would be wrong, and I'm not going to do that. First of all, there are numerous disputes about how they even ended up in the same spot as the Native American protester here. There were also pro-choice people who were not behaving perfectly here. There are reports that Indigenous peoples protesters were yelling, "Go back to Europe," to these white kids. That's actually on video. That's insane, and that needs to be denounced. There was a group of, they were called by some people black Muslims, but they're not. They're black Israelites who were proselytizing in the very, very inflammatory way that they do, yelling at everybody, including at these kids. If you're not familiar with the black Israelites, they're a group of black Americans who claims that they are the true descendants of the Israelites and sort of, in a sense, the real Jews, although they're sort of a crossover group between being Jews and Christians, but really what they're known for is being inflammatory street preachers, which they chose to do at a central point between two conflicting political rallies. Reports include that the Black Israelites started arguing with the MAGA kids. They were reportedly calling them child molested fags, dirty ass crackers, demon animals, future school shooters, and racist bastards. And at a certain point in all of this, Nathan Phillips shows up when the Black Israelites are taunting the kids, and he walks into the crowd of students choosing to do this. He could have opted to walk in a different way. From the video that I saw, Nathan Phillips walked up to the kids, and the kids just stood there. There are people reporting that there were chants of build the wall against the indigenous peoples. That's disgusting. And that, of course, proves that the border wall has never actually been about border security, because if it were, you wouldn't be yelling that at Native Americans. It's about xenophobia and racism, and it's vile. But the problem I have with this, Pat, is that it became an internet mob with people cherry picking out of a 2-hour video, trying to identify some of these underage kids who, of course, bear significant responsibility themselves, but also are kids. They're the product of their parents. Where were the chaperones? Why did the school allow them to go to an anti-choice rally, dressed like they're coming from a Trump rally? So I'm not here to rank who did the worst thing or to say who's more to blame. And I'm not saying that everyone is equally to blame. But what's clear to me is that I can't think of anyone who behaved particularly appropriately here. And I am with you in being disgusted with the MAGA kids. I am with you in being disgusted by everything we're learning about things that have taken place at basketball games and their behavior. But we can't pretend, Pat, that they were the unique and sole instigators here.
And there were certainly a bunch of misunderstandings. When you take a look at even that entire 2-hour clip, you may not come away knowing exactly what happened because it's just not the best video quality, not the best audio quality. One thing I will point out, though, is it's unclear that Nathan Phillips, when he walked up to those group of kids, like, I don't know if they necessarily thought that he was being combative or what he was trying to do, because they responded like it was some sort of pep rally, like like maybe Nathan Phillips was like playing along with them. I don't know. I think you have to kind of give the kids at least an out on that one, because I don't know if they realized if they were being offensive or if the situation was going to escalate, but certainly the responsibility does not bear solely on them.
I know that there are people on the left who are going to be mad at me. How dare I question the initial narrative? How dare I question the narrative that places blame only on the kids? I think that these kids are vile, quite frankly. And the more we learn about other things that have happened involving their school, it's absolutely horrible. But we need to be full in our reporting. And I think in the long run, everybody loses by pushing a narrative that's increasingly demonstrably false based on the video. If you disagree with me, I do want to hear from you. We have another entrant into the 2020 Democratic primary. It is Democratic California Senator Kamala Harris. I was going to play her announcement video, Pat, but let's skip it since we're a little low on time. Also announcing in the last few days was Senator Kirsten Gillibrand from New York. I think she has no shot. She didn't make a formal announcement. I think she announced that an announcement is coming, sort of like an exploratory type announcement. Kamala Harris, I think, has much more of a shot than Kirsten Gillibrand. I loved seeing Kamala Harris question all sorts of clowns in Senate hearings. She has the right ideas on many issues. Before doing a deep dive on her at some point in the future, I will mention 2 areas of concern for me. Number one, we still don't have a good explanation about why Kamala Harris didn't prosecute One West Bank for their foreclosure violations back in 2013 when she was the Attorney General of California. That was current Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin's former bank. A very strange statement was put out, not really explaining why there was no prosecution, not really explaining what degree of involvement she had with that decision. It's a very big question mark for me, and it kind of relates to more general concerns over Harris related to her ties to finance and Wall Street. She's also against police wearing body cameras, and I just don't agree with her on that issue. But big picture, she has a lot of the right ideas, and her path to victory could depend on California moving up their primary. California, her home state, has moved up their primary in the process, which could help Kamala Harris. At the same time, California awards their delegates proportionately based on primary results. So unless she has like just some massive, massive blowout win in California, it's not going to be likely that it would make her the clear favorite in the Democratic primary. Big identity primary so far for women. We have Elizabeth Warren, Tulsi Gabbard, Kirsten Gillibrand, and now Kamala Harris. We have a black woman in Kamala Harris. We have a Hispanic man in Julian Castro. We have a Hindu woman in Tulsi Gabbard. And as much as I don't want it to, identity is no doubt going to figure hugely into the calculations that are going to be made. And I have a real concern that it's going to degrade the primary process and kind of just get in the way of picking the person with the right positions and who's most set to lead when it comes to the end of the line. And I hope I'm wrong about that. We'll start to see very shortly. It's only January and the field is getting very, very full. There's an upside to that, lots of people to choose from. There's a downside to that, which is just because Republicans had 17 people in 2016 and a long shot ended up winning and becoming the president, doesn't guarantee that Democrats can have just as much success with that style. So we'll see, and we'll continue coverage of that. We have a voicemail number. The number is 219-2-DAVID-P. Here's a question that came in overnight.
Hey, David, this is Keith from Louisiana. I'm just calling about the right using this term angel parents for family members of people who have been killed by undocumented immigrants. I'm just curious where this started from, what your thoughts are about this, and what it's supposed to even mean. If these are supposed to be seen as like messengers from God, I don't really understand the symbolism. Just curious about your thoughts on that. Thanks.
It's a propaganda term. I mean, yeah, angel moms, it's anyone who loses a child has suffered just an unimaginable hardship and grief, and it's a tragedy. And the idea of saying that if you lost a child because of the action of an undocumented immigrant, then you are designated an angel mom or an angel parent. It's a propaganda term, and it's actually catching on, and it seems to be working pretty well for them. We have a great bonus show for you today. Hope you'll join me by either becoming a member or a patron. I'll see you then.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.